Hello watch enthusiasts and welcome to Watch Chronicler. Earlier this month we saw the release of a watch which turned more than a few heads. The Swiss automatic watch presented a rotating bezel, luminous dial, and colours including black, blue and green from one of the biggest brands around. I'm of course not referring to the Rolex Submariner, but rather the woefully ill-considered Ralph Lauren Polo watch collection. Despite featuring a Swiss automatic Sellita SW200 movement and a price starting at £1,420, this is a fashion watch through and through. That in itself is certainly no crime, but it features an extremely simplistic polished and brushed case, aping the more popular dive watches on the market, a rotating bezel more intent on conveying branding than timing, and a dial so poorly printed and hideously adorned with a polo player that you'd struggle to understand such a price. It is, in my opinion, at the very least, a beastly waste of money. Ignoring those who simply like the design, and after all opinions are personal, you would have to be a lunatic to buy this watch for either value or features, given the competition from other, more established brands. I'm not usually as opinionated about a watch, especially before handling it, but I think that most will have come to the very same conclusions. Nevertheless, this watch was written about with no sarcasm at all by the likes of Hodinkie's Danny Milton, Monochrome's Rebecca Dalton, and Jashan Su of SGX Watches, my favourite horological commentator, by the way. Whether ulterior motives existed for discussing the new Ralph Lauren Polo or not, this watch and its extensive coverage made me think at length about the function of fashion watches, whether affordable or expensive, and at which point horology actually becomes nothing more than fashion. To give you an idea of what I mean, consider a Rolex Submariner in the 1960s. There are innumerable versions with minute dial variations which excite us as collectors, but were utterly irrelevant to their buyers in period. In fact, a Submariner was perhaps closer to a fashion watch than to a modern luxury timepiece in the sense that it fulfilled an obvious and clear function without any haze-inducing talk of heritage. Ironically, it's actually quite difficult to produce a modern watch with so many silently produced variations. Take for instance the new Doxa Sub 300T. It's a lovely watch even with its slightly odd quirks. However, with a helium escape valve which wasn't present on launch, still isn't visible in press photos or Doxa stock photos, yet which seems to appear in several different executions on watches sold. In short, if you're interested in buying watches with a modern attitude, it's confusing and somewhat off-putting as a conundrum, but I digress. If you're enjoying this video, please remember to like, subscribe and hit the bell icon to catch all of our new content. Also, to be kept abreast of all new watches you should know about, follow us on Instagram or simply head over to watchchronicler.com. Here you'll find our full articles, podcasts and much more to get the full Watch Chronicler experience. So what is a fashion watch? In my opinion, it's a watch which fulfills only its aesthetic obligations. By this I mean that it appeals simply to someone who wants to appear to have a nice looking watch. A fashion watch, though, does not have any real technical merit. By this I mean that no specifications beyond the entirely necessary are needed. With that being said, price does have an effect, as a standard Cartier tank is, by virtue of its primary clientele, a fashion watch. It's a beautifully made piece, and courtesy of its background, exquisitely designed. Nevertheless, it remains a watch worn purely for looks, and not for any underlying horological merit, unless you're an enthusiast who feels strongly about the history, or it's one of the more mechanically complex versions. Inevitably though, the fashion watches which we are most familiar with are those of the likes of Daniel Wellington, Movement, Vincero, or Filippo Loreti. These sit in a range of £100 to a few £100s. Now, to address the usual objections of the watch community, these watches are regarded as cheaply made tat, appealing to those who are perhaps not aware that better quality options can be found for the same price, or who may simply not be interested. Let me stress that there's absolutely nothing wrong with that sort of purchase. Even so, this is, in my opinion, largely correct. These watches are produced from extremely cheap, crudely manufactured components from the Far East, and usually cannot be serviced. From timekeeping to general build integrity, these aren't watches to rely on. So are the owners of these brands simply raking in money? Well, I can't answer that directly, but look at it this way. If a respected watch company wants to produce a new watch, even if it's based on an existing timepiece, considerable funds have to be spent on ensuring the parts fit together and are durable over time. This requires considerable prototyping and testing. Then serviceable movements, whether Swiss, Japanese, quartz or mechanical, have to be sourced, and appropriate marketing has to sell the watches. Most affordable fashion watch brands, however, can forget the lengthy development costs by using off-the-shelf parts, cheap disposable movements, and spend the earnings from their watches on serious marketing. Just look on YouTube. The chances are that if you're watching this video, you will have seen at least one advert from one of these brands. So why is this a problem for serious quality watch brands? Surely they operate in a different circle. Of course, some fashion watch brands try to target potential long-term luxury buyers with blatantly misleading claims. Filippo Loreti, I believe, continue to run adverts claiming that the markups for luxury watches are greater than 1,000%. Whilst I know plenty of people who would love this to be true, it simply isn't the case. In fact, you'll on average tend to see a maximum of a markup of 40%, so it really is nowhere near that claim. This isn't the most general approach though. More generally, fashion watch brands have successfully capitalised on the recent resurgence of wristwatches to simply give someone a simple, handsome watch. This is what, for instance, Daniel Wellington do so well. They don't have to ask the buyer to understand what the watch is, they simply offer them ease of access to something stylish. So why is there any paradox to this whole business? Well, the luxury, or at least quality watch industry, has operated since the late 1980s with an air of traditional responsibility and a desire to educate customers bordering on the evangelical. Now, don't get me wrong, understanding what you want to buy is critical for a good purchase, but having to study and be fascinated by the subject is a bit much for a lot of buyers. Consequently, it isn't much of a surprise that, for the price of a Daniel Wellington, many buyers, particularly from the vastly underappreciated, underrespected and undercatered to female market, will choose the fashion watch over, let's say, a well-engineered Seiko due to the variety and far more opaque buying experience. The paradox is that the more the conventional brands try to create a story around themselves to attack their competitors, the more watches they can sell in their own market, but the fewer watches they will ever sell to the fashion watch buyer. But what does this mean for the Ralph Lauren Polo, which I opened with? Well, this is a rare case. This is a fashion watch with a decent Swiss movement, with good finishing. However, with its simplistic numerals, cheesy branding and off-the-shelf hands, a pretty low shelf, let's be honest, this watch tries to appeal mechanically to an enthusiast, and aesthetically, well, I can't actually find anyone who said anything positive about it. At least it was useful food for thought. But what are your thoughts on the fashion watch paradox? Do you think the conventional watch industry could ever appeal to this different market, or even understand it, or do you think that they should remain separate? If you enjoyed this video, remember to like, subscribe and hit the bell icon to see more videos here in future. Thank you very much for watching. This is Armon from WatchChronicler.com, out.